You're watching Beyond Market. Welcome. I'm Esther Awoniyi. Many thanks for joining us. On today's show, we'll discuss South Africa's elections and implications for and what's at stake for the economy. You can join the conversation with the hashtag Beyond Market, and you can follow my Twitter handle too at Esther Awoniyi. I'm also joined today by Chris Bishop. He's the head of programming at CNBC Africa. Now, Chris, let me ask you. Now, election opinion polls suggest that although this is a contested election, the ANC will still get a majority of the votes, but with a smaller margin than it's had in the past. Would you say that that's a fair representation of how things have panned out so far?
Yeah, absolutely. For the last three elections, it's all been in the 60%. In fact, actually, I think going back about 15 years, it was the two-thirds majority, which was more than 66% of the vote, which gives the ruling party a lot more power when it comes to making legislative decisions. This time, it depends on who you talk to. I've been talking to a lot of economists, a lot of business people and analysts over the last couple of days here. And some people are saying 52. Some people are saying maybe 57, 58% here. But what is clear is that this is going to be the most highly contested election in 25 years of democracy in this country. You've got an EFF, which is in the opposition, the Economic Freedom Fighters, who are on the march. It looks like they're going to increase their share quite significantly this time around. You've got the DA, which is in a bit of disarray. That's the official opposition, but still is going to mount a challenge. And then you've got the ANC that's really under pressure for a lot of things, for the economy. It's under pressure for the way it's been dealing with certain issues, like everything from education to corruption in the last few years. And you've got Cyril Ramaphosa there, the business candidate, shall we say, leading the party, who's trying to hold everything together and trying to get a good mandate so then he can start with his work.
Now, one final question. But how would you describe the mood now? I mean, the final campaigns are over, speeches have been made. How would you describe the mood right now?
It's been very, very peaceful. Everyone's done their campaigns. There have been no incidents. If anything, I was just discussing it today the other day with some other journalists. They were saying that it doesn't seem like there's an election on. Normally, the streets are full of people campaigning. There's posters everywhere. You really know. But this time, it's a lot more low key. But I think that people have realized that a lot of people have made up their minds already which way they're going to vote. And what is certain is that the ruling party is going to have a much reduced majority, without a doubt.
Okay, Chris, now stick around for us now. As preparations for South Africa's elections hits full swing, Ambassador Charles Stith is the chairman of the African Presidential Leadership Center. He joins us on the show today. Thank you for taking the time out to join us today.
Great to be with you.
Now, as we've seen and as we've heard, it's the most contested election for South Africa post-apartheid. What would you say is at stake here, especially for the ANC?
Well, obviously, the larger the majority, the broader the mandate. And so to the extent to which the ANC's share of the vote creeps closer to 50%, the more difficult it will be for them to declare the kind of mandate they need to move the country forward. And you know, that's not breaking news. I mean, as Chris alluded to earlier, you know, there's much commentary by economists, political scientists, and prognosticators and prevaricators about what we can expect. But I think one thing is certain, the larger the ANC percentage of the vote, I think it positions the country better, particularly in an economic sense, because you've got some certainty moving forward.
Now, Charles, in the last two elections, the ANC, or in the past rather, the ANC has enjoyed big wins, but in the last two elections, we've seen support and the support base of the ANC winning, and now President Cyril Ramaphosa is trying desperately to reverse some of those losses. What we're also hearing is that he appears to be more popular as a person than the party itself. How would you say that this is working? Is this a big plus for an advantage for the ANC? Does him being more popular, standing out apart from the party as one who is able to bring much needed reforms for the party and by extension the economy?
Well, I mean, as you frame the question, it's kind of hard to calculate, his standing versus the ANC, because at the end of the day, it is a parliamentary system. But what I would say, and I think it is clear that President Ramaphosa represented a breath of fresh air in his commitment to dealing with corruption, to make sure that the government serves the interests of the people rather than the interests of individuals, is something that has gotten some traction. And I think the extent to which the ANC will run up its numbers will be a reflection of what he's brought to bear in this contest.
Talking about Cyril Ramaphosa, I mean, I have a theory, and I'd like to know what your views are on it. I mean, there's a number of things. One, Cyril Ramaphosa is a self-made man. He does not need anything from anybody. You could say that he deals with this post as altruism as much as anything else. And secondly, the other thing I think about him is that never forget who held the microphone for Nelson Mandela when he was released in 1990. Cyril Ramaphosa. I think he wants to put his name up there next to Mandela's. I don't know. What do you think as a former diplomat?
Well, I think, just to start where you did in terms of his standing, personally, he doesn't need the job. He doesn't need the paycheck. And that's a good thing. Particularly where the issue of corruption and government malfeasance is an issue, and it is. I think no one would argue that was not a factor in the last municipal elections, where the ANC lost ground to a significant extent. That's a good thing, and I do think with his political credentials. And the gravitas that he brings as a business person, he does see himself as a linear descendant of the Mandela leadership line. And I'm convinced he wants to do the right thing by the country.
I mean, you're working here, you're studying this election very closely for your organization. What's your prediction, you think, in terms of majority for the ANC?
Well, there's an old expression, and it's not specific to politics. Sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. And I think the biggest asset that the ANC has going for it today, quite frankly, is the fact that the opposition parties are relatively weak. The EFF, while it's clear their pitch to empower people at the grassroots level is gaining some traction. And it's to appreciate it, because people all along the political spectrum need a voice. This push for the land, as they framed it, is really an agrarian vision in a digital age. And at the end of the day, won't do much to move the ball in an economic sense.
But one thing I'll say about the EFF, I mean, talking about the land, there's a lot of promises they've made, which I am a bit cynical about, because I think they're checks that the economy here can't cash. What do you think?
Well, again, an issue like the land, as they framed it, most young people want to go to the cities. The 21st century global economy is a technology-driven economy. To focus on the land and land distribution doesn't position the economy or the people of this country to be a factor in the 21st century high-tech global economy. I mean, that's not rocket science, no pun intended.
Charles, for the ANC, I mean, they've been in power for 25 years, and in those 25 years, the promises have been the same, and the problems also haven't changed either. Now, what we're hearing is that there are a lot of apathetic and despondent voters who are undecided, who like President Cyril Ramaphosa on the one hand, but don't particularly trust the ANC on the other hand. How do you think that is going to impact on the elections in terms of the outcome, or just how things play out at the polls?
I think one of the great signs of the maturation of South Africa's democracy is that in more mature democracies, most voters are driven by that axiom of that great 20th century philosopher Janet Jackson. What have you done for me lately? And I think you're starting to see some of that in the electoral process and discourse in this country. And I think, at the end of the day, I think it's a good thing because politicians need to be held accountable for delivering for the people. Now, having said that, I think it's clear that the ANC lost some ground in terms of what it delivered at the grassroots level, which again I think was reflected in the last municipal elections. But the fact of the matter is that the gulf between the masses of folks in South Africa and the ruling classes, the whites under the apartheid system, that gulf was so large that the reality is you can't close it in a generation. And I think in one sense the ANC is a victim of its success because when you look at the first 10 years that the ANC was in power and you look at the monumental changes that resulted under their stewardship in terms of housing, health care, education, clean water, infrastructure. It was nothing short of miraculous. Now, they were starting at a base of almost zero. So the progress that they made was much more noticeable over that 10-year period. To continue at that pace, I think, was unrealistic. But again, having said that, they probably could have done more, and clearly voters are saying they want them to do more, or whoever is in power.
Ambassador Stith, we must thank you for your time so far. We'll take a moment now to take a short break, and I'll be right back to pick it from where we left off. I've been speaking to Ambassador Charles Stith, who's the chairman of the African Presidential Leadership Center. We're back with Beyond Markets to join us again. Joining us, you're watching Beyond Markets, and of course with CNBC Africa's head of programming, Chris Bishop, and we are discussing South Africa's elections and the economy with Ambassador Charles Stith, who's the chairman of the African Presidential Leadership Center. Ambassador, thank you for your time so far. Now, unemployment, inequality, corruption, those are some of the key issues that have most big concern to voters. But what is your take on how the candidates in this election, those running, have approached these issues in terms of what they plan to do differently, compared to what we've seen in the last 25 years?
I mean, the thing that I found interesting about this election is that folks have very clearly articulated their sense of what they believe people see as the major problems. I mean, for the EFF, it's land. For the DA, it's corruption. For the ANC, we understand the need to empower people economically and politically. The thing that I found interesting, though, is that there's no big vision being articulated on any front. The other day I came across a piece which I actually sent out over the email of the 30 largest infrastructure projects in the history of humanity. I think it was top 50, it might be 50 or 30. And the thing that I found striking, that there was only one African country mentioned currently or historically that had a significant enough infrastructure project to make that list, and that was Egypt. South Africa needs to be in the business of big picture visions. It's got the most sophisticated and robust economy on the continent. Despite the dramatics that get played out during the political season, South Africa also has one of the deepest benches when it comes to political talent and civic talent. South Africa ought to be positioning itself as the epicenter of all things African. Right now, you've got South Africa Airways, which extends to every capital on the continent. And every day you read articles about whether or not SAA ought to remain solvent. There's a little place called Dubai, which has become the epicenter of economic activity in the Middle East. And one of the things that drives that place, their place in that economy, is Emirates Airlines. There shouldn't be a debate about whether SAA remains solvent. If you want to be the epicenter of the continental economy, you want all roads leading to South Africa. You know, you talk about the issues around ESCOM. If you're going to grow a population to participate in the 21st century global economy, people have got to have access to electricity. So whether or not ESCOM remains solvent or not is, at best an ironic conversation to be having, and some might argue nonsensical. There needs to be, in my humble opinion, a big picture vision. Something along the lines of John Kennedy. You know, let's go to the moon. Why? Because we can and we should. There needs to be some big picture visions here around which people can coalesce and work together.
I hear what you're saying about South African Airways. You're right. It's an important thing. But the problem is this economy is not making enough. It's not creating enough wealth. Unfortunately, to support it, the government coffers are almost dry. So it seems that this country is now, unfortunately, looking at austerity measures rather than expansionary measures. I honestly don't see a way out of it. But maybe you, as an observer inside the country, can give us a view on that.
When you start to look at, again, I made the point earlier, and it shouldn't get lost, that South Africa has the most sophisticated, it's no longer the largest economy. They've followed Nigeria and Egypt, but it's got one of the largest economies, one of the largest economies on the continent, and by far the most sophisticated and robust. I was meeting with an investment banker this morning before coming over here, and we were talking about global economics and Africa's place in it. And one of the points that he made is that South Africa's pension funds, in aggregate, are larger than the pension funds in China. So, the country has a lot going for it. The question is, how does it utilize its resources? How does it mobilize its people? And to what end? It's good to say let's work together, but we're working together to go where? And that's the big question that needs to be asked. I mean, the Chinese are talking about this the Silk Belt that they're rebuilding, that it will extend from China all the way into Europe. Similar sorts of conversations need to be happening here in South Africa relative to the rest of the continent. We don't talk about it much, and in the kind of xenophobic climate, the last administration, I don't think there was sufficient appreciation. But one of the things that helped South Africa grow post-94, as well as the rest of the continent, is the extent to which fiscal capital and human capital from South Africa move throughout the continent to drive economic activity.
And just one last question as well. I mean, my feeling is that unless Cyril Ramaphosa gets a strong mandate, it's going to be very difficult for him to make the necessarily unpopular, painful changes that are needed for the economy for it to prosper in the future.
Well, look, if it was easy, everybody would do it, right? I mean, that's that's the kind of job the presidency is. I've met the President Ramaphosa on a number of occasions. I don't know him well. I do believe he's a man of character, commitment, and integrity. I think those are virtues that are very, very important in a leader at this particular point in South Africa's history. And I think he's committed to doing well by the country and doing good for the people. So, I'm optimistic as an outsider. I would hope folks are optimistic within the country. And regardless of the size of the mandate, to parlay his slogan, it is going to take all South Africans working together to move the country forward.
Now, Charles, Chris makes a good point there, talking about President Ramaphosa needing a strong mandate to be able to make those necessary changes. I want to take you back to my point earlier where I talked about President Ramaphosa's popularity being more popular, as it were, than the party. And what we've seen in the past is that the party may decide to curb some of that. They may think that he's getting too powerful and may decide to curb that. Do you foresee that happening? I'm talking about internal party politics now. Do you see that happening in the future and that becoming a problem as he tries to reform the economy?
Well, the short answer is that's hard to predict. I think the longer answer starts with the last municipal elections. Had those elections not resulted in the loss of control, political power in some of the major urban centers of the country, we probably would not have seen President Zuma eased out of office. So I think that was a wake-up call for the ANC. Do you have factions within the party? The short answer to that is yes, but that's typical of any party. I'm hopeful, and I sincerely believe that party will coalesce around President Ramaphosa, and hopefully he'll have the time and support that he needs to move the country forward.
Now, you talked earlier about harnessing human capital. Now, the country has a very high unemployment rate, especially among the youth, high youth unemployment. How concerned are you about the ability of whoever wins to be able to get those much needed jobs to the youth to ensure that those unemployment numbers come down, and of course to bring down the crime rate?
Well, President Ramaphosa, as the citizens in South Africa would know, has made youth unemployment a #1 issue in the list of things that he wants to address, and has committed, I think, to creating a 250,000 new jobs, particularly targeted towards young people. Obviously, those kinds of things are easier said than done. I think one of the issues that the country is going to have to deal with substantively, and this is where the unions and policymakers are going to have to come together. There's a profound transition taking place for political reasons and demographic reasons in terms of global manufacturing. Folks are looking for other options than China. There's no reason that a country like South Africa, a continent like Africa, shouldn't emerge and be, at least fight for a place as a major manufacturing center globally. Now, in order to do that, you've got to offer competitive wages. And I've seen that struggle being played out in the country, and I think the thing for everybody to keep in mind is that what you're talking about is establishing a floor and not a ceiling. And in order for South Africa to be competitive, they've got to offer competitive wage rates. And what we've seen, I'm old enough to remember when you got all kind of little dollar trinkets manufactured in Japan. And there were these lower skilled jobs that provided the foundation for the kind of growth that we saw in the Japanese economy. It's what we've seen relative to the Chinese economy. And it's unrealistic to expect that Africa can experience the same kind of growth in terms of the middle class without going through a similar process.
I've been speaking to Ambassador Charles Stith, who's the chairman of the African Presidential Leadership Center. Also joining us today was Chris Bishop, head of programming at CNBC Africa. Well, that's our show for today. Thank you so much for being a part of it. Remember, you can watch the show at 5 p.m. West African time daily and have access to all previous episodes of the show on our website. That's cnbcafrica.com. You can also stay engaged with the hashtag Beyond Market, and you can follow by Twitter handle too at Esther Awoniyi. For myself and the team, to have a great day.